So we're going to talk a little bit about pattern reading. People pick up a pattern. I love the pattern. Let's try something different. Okay. I love the pattern. I love the pattern. I want to make that hat. Oh, gorgeous. So we need to take a look at the pattern, folks. This particular one has several different versions, and she has a beautiful pattern because they are all sampled and displayed there. So when we talk about a pattern, you want to look at the yarn. What does the pattern look like? How does it drape on a person? So we have one that is a little more slouchy here. So you know, whoops, that side, that side, that side. It's a little bit more slouchy so that you know it's got to be a little bit looser knitting. This one down here looks like it's either got something funky on the top or it is a messy hair bun. Hair hat bun, I forget what they call that, messy hair bun. So when you go into a pattern, you want to take a look at, we're going to grab this one. So she writes a little bit about how she started it, what brought her to go ahead and write this pattern. And this is a Soul Sun is a simple, gratifying knit, lace short rows and complementary color inserted in an asymmetrical shawl. So you get to hear a little bit, read a little bit about the history of why she made it and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of helpful because if she's really frustrated and stuff, a lot of them will make it an easier knit, if you will. And then this one is really nice because it shows it in one color in the pattern. And you can kind of see how the lace looks differently from the garter sections. Then she shows it to you in contrasting yarn. Oh my gosh, and we have so many new gorgeous yarns here that we're going to be able to use for that. I think we're going to have to make that one. So then you go on to the pattern and it will tell you the sizes. So you want to take a look at the size. Now we did find a pattern the other day. Somebody asked me, well, how big is this? I said, I don't know. Where is it in the pattern? Well, the pattern didn't actually say how big it was, but we know that it uses two 400 yarn skeins. So it's going to be a pretty big shawl. Again, you have to look at the pattern to see what, how deep it's going to be, but it could be anywhere from 7 inches to 20 inches. So it's really a tough one if they don't give you the finished measurements. So you want to look at that. You want to say, well, I'm a petite person. I really don't want it that big. Am I going to be able to adjust it or stop the pattern at a different size? So you really want to think about that when you're looking at a pattern. Take a look at the size. Is it going to work for you? Do you like things that are really, really big? Am I going to be able to make this bigger? Then you're going to look at the gauge. Gauge is not as important in shawls, obviously. Hats, it's going to make a difference because you want it to fit. It's going to make a difference, obviously, in clothing, sweaters, and that kind of stuff. So you are going to want to watch the gauge. And if it's a sweater, you want to watch your row count. Row counts can vary by the size of the needle. So you really want to make sure because you don't want your armhole to be too short for the top of the sleeve to fit in. If that's going to be something. We did do that. We had a sample here. The gal did not measure her row count. The armhole was really, really long and the sleeve didn't fit in. So we had to rip the sleeve out about halfway back and come back up making some more adjustments to it. So you really want to do that. If it's a shawl or something loose, a scarf, it really isn't going to matter that much. Where it's going to matter is if you are knitting much tighter than what the gauge is, this gauge will give this drape. Yep, I got to learn how to work backwards here. So this drape works with this gauge. If your gauge is much smaller and tighter, you are not going to get that drape. And we talked about that when we did yarn substitution. So I'm not going to go through that again. You can go find the video on that one. But that's important. The materials, it's going to tell you what size needle. That's the recommended start size. Again, if you're a tight knitter, you're going to want to go up because you want it to be a little bit looser to make this beautiful drape. You're also going to be told what yardage on your yarn. Sometimes they tell you what yarn they used. That's a little bit dangerous for everybody because we may not carry that yarn. We may not be able to get that yarn. So, but it will give you the yardage. This one is going to be 2 colors of fingering weight yarn, 400 yards each. So that means 800 yards. And then she does tell you what the yardage was in the yarn that she used. Then she talks a little bit, this is a great pattern because she talks a little bit about choosing your yarn colors. So again, you've got the picture of the 2-tone, plus we had the picture of the 1 skein. Or that might actually be 2 skeins. Might just be how the color is knit up and dyed. Well, anyway. So she talks a little bit about choosing color, which is nice. And then there's always the notes section. You definitely want to read the notes section because they give you some tidbits, whether if the first stitch is slipped, should it be slipped knitwise or purlwise or whatever. And then we get started. Isn't that cool? So we're going to get started. So you have your setup rows. Sometimes the pattern will give you the pattern stitches first, whether it's a lace pattern or a garter stitch, yarn over, or something like that. You want to read those first and make sure that it says, let's get started. You want it to be, some people have actually taken a look at the pattern, they explained the pattern, and then they started it, and they weren't supposed to start with that section. So they were totally off when they got to actually doing the section of the pattern. And some patterns are nice enough to give you the number of stitches at the end of each section. Some people will sit and figure it out because there are increases in there, and you want to be able at the end of the row to know what the stitches were and that kind of stuff. So there's lots of stuff. A lot of people will say, read through the pattern first, make sure you understand it. My comment to that is no. You're not always going to understand it. You try to envision what they're saying, okay, a yarn over and then knit 2 together and then do this. As long as you understand what to do. Do you know how to knit 2 together? Do you know how to KFB, knit front and back? If you understand all of that, don't always try to envision what it's going to look like. Because sometimes that's really hard to do. Even for those of us who have knit for a long time, it's like, well, let's just get started because we know, we've read through the pattern, we know what a YO is, we know what a knit 2K together is, we know what all that means, so we can do the pattern. If you don't know what something is, you can always go to, this one has a key at the back, and it tells you a yarn over, a YO is a yarn over. Short rows, how to do them, how she wants them done, that kind of stuff. Sometimes the key is at the front of the pattern, sometimes it is at the end of the pattern. So that's your information on pattern reading. You want to, and some are much better than others. Some give you virtually no information. This one, we'll go back to the hat pattern here, and it does say here that the changing stitch segments, and she talks a little bit about that, variegated or gradient, and then she talks about the stitch patterns are made of simple decreases and yarn overs. Okay, I understand how to do that. Good level for an adventurous beginner. They're originally released, we don't need to worry about that. And then she goes into what you'll need. Again, your needles, how many yards, whether it's going to be a circular needle, magic loop, double pointed needles. Then she goes into the gauge over here, so we know it's 11 stitches for 4 inches, 2 by 2 ribbing. Then we go over here, the sizing information. And again, she has a notes section. And her notes are, most of the pattern is written for knitting in the round. So there's information on how you're going to go about doing the pattern. Is this something that you're comfortable with? Do you really not enjoy working in the round? So you want to learn how to do this with magic loop, or can I do it with double pointed needles or anything like that? You absolutely can. And then down here at the bottom are her abbreviations. So you can make sure sometimes, again, basically knitting and slip stitching is all the same, but some people want you to slip purlwise and some people want you to slip knitwise. Then we go into the pattern, and medium, she gives you the sizing. So again, make a copy of your pattern and circle your sizes, make all your notations. No stitch markers are used for the first 3 parts because you won't keep track in the round. Then she goes into the brim, the body top, and then the crown. And then you go on to the finishing. And she's nice enough to give you different optional embellishments, whether you're going to do a pom-pom, weave in through the holes, or what you're going to do. And then she basically says, happy knitting. So that is a good pattern. It's all written out for you. It's all explained. Sometimes you get a pattern that doesn't give you any of that. You might want to rethink it unless you're a really great knitter. This is Winter Morning, just to show you a little bit of how people do things differently. So she has a really fun attitude. She puts them all in little boxes. You have the gauge, you have the finished measurement, you have the supplies, stitches and abbreviations, the explanation of the stitches, and then some techniques. So, and she not only gives you the techniques, but she gives you websites to go to look at, find those techniques if you're not familiar with them. And then she gives you the pattern. And she also charts it out for you. For those of you who are interested in reading charts, that is there. And that's that fun morning, winter morning headband. So folks, that's pretty much all I have for today. I want to say thank you for joining me, and we will see you next week. Hopefully we'll see you Monday.